All right, here we are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, my name is Blake Nathan, the CEO founder of the Educate Me Foundation. And I want to welcome everybody that's tuning in on Facebook and YouTube on the Indianapolis Recorders page to our Educators in Trauma of COVID-19 Town Hall meeting. I have the distinct honor and privilege to moderate this conversation. I want to pass the mic here in a second to some well qualified experts in this industry, in the educational field, and also the medical industry. And so, without further ado, I want to make sure I introduce two lovely ladies. First off, Miss Alicia McCoy of Peak Mind, who is the CEO and founder of the organization, and also Dr. Natalie Henderson from Indianapolis Public School System, who is the Chief Schools Officer. So, Miss McCoy, I know I just told you everybody who you are by name and title, but kind of let our viewers know who you are, what you do, and a little bit about Peak Mind as well.
Sure, thank you. Happy to be here and to talk about this important topic. Peak Mind has built a seed platform, an application to help employees become aware of mental well-being hurdles and how they are can overcome them in the workplace. Feelings, emotions, suppressed or unknown, coping skills, helpful techniques that can help experts to guide them when they're taking their path for change. We take mainstream machine learning technology and use that to impact the lives of users by accelerating the process of what action step to take next. So that all sounds fancy. We're basically saying we're here to lower your stress at work.
Awesome, awesome. Dr. Henderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I am Natalie Henderson. I'm the Chief Schools Officer. I serve on the cabinet of Dr. Alicia Johnson, the Superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools, the largest district in Indiana. We serve over 30,000 students with traditional district manage as well as innovation partners and choice programs.
Awesome, awesome. So this is going to be a conversation, right? I know I have a series of questions that I would love to ask you, lovely ladies, throughout this probably hour town hall. But I'm going to feed off of you guys' responses. So I know I may get a little bit of off script here and there based on the answers that I receive. But I'm going to probably start with Dr. Henderson. I kind of asked this question behind the scenes a little bit. Anybody that doesn't know about the kind of like mask mandate, the proof of vaccination that IPS and Dr. Johnson has put out over the coming weeks for as we go gearing up for back to school, actually next week, right? Students are coming back. Teachers are already probably back to summer professional development. So kind of what is the kind of feedback you're getting right now from a teacher perspective about some of these mandates and how are parents feeling about, teachers that may not have to wear a mask if they already are fully vaccinated?
Sure. So when we returned to in-person school during the 2021 school year, we were all mass students and staff. And as we were planning to start school, we did offer guidance for our families and our staff who had chosen to be vaccinated and wanted to be unmasked that they could opt in. Since then, we have pivoted with guidance released from the CDC and the Marion County Health Department that we will, effective August 2nd, require all staff and students to wear masks regardless of vaccination status. And so that is a pivot. And so to your question about how folks feeling, is somewhat new, so I don't have any feedback to share with you. But we did a couple weeks ago have that option for families and staff if they were vaccinated, and we're pivoted now to go back to how we ended the school year with all staff and students wearing masks.
Awesome. So now we can get to some good questions. And Ms. McCoy, this may be a question that's kind of punting to you a little bit, right? We had this thing called a pandemic push out, right? In teachers' terms is the pandemic, usually you have a certain amount of teachers that leave the profession every single school year, right? And we understand COVID with the pandemic from doing virtual instruction to face-to-face, and then some people going to virtual, doing hybrid models. You have seen teachers really been stretched to kind of their wits' end. I know your business is serving, teachers for social and emotional learning and make sure you can provide those support systems around there. Kind of tell us how has probably business been with you right now, and kind of from a teacher perspective, have you seen a lot of clientele come your way due to some issues that are going on mentally with these educators?
Yeah, it is unique. The mental health pandemic is what some people are saying we're just entering following the COVID pandemic. And it's the last couple of years have been hard. Teaching has always been hard. I have friends that are teachers. I taught at the adjunct level, right, teaching. But in the circumstances that we've been in, we all know, I don't have to go through how hard it was, but coming out of it, into the mental health pandemic, I think that some of us have actually built some resiliency from what we've gone through from the last year and a half. And so resiliency is great to have, right? Because once a trauma happens to you once, you know a little bit how to adjust for the second time. Not to say that everybody can process that trauma any better than the first time. However, some people can. And so there are some people who are coming into the new school year and are okay. Some people are not okay. We talk about COVID PTSD and COVID syndrome, all of these new diagnosable conditions that some people are suffering with because of what we went through. And so I think that everyone knows that this exists. These theories have been proven, that it's been stressful enough to cause trauma and anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation in some, in people, especially if they were already predisposed to these conditions, or already struggling with life ahead of the pandemic. However, I think some people, it's a vast spectrum of mental well-being, and in certain days there may be higher depression or, well-being symptoms than other days. And so I think it's interesting as we're going back. I think educators and administrators are going to start to see and start to be able to tell how people are reacting now that they're going back to school and going back to work.
Yeah, and that brings me to Dr. Henderson to the table, right? So, and I think she probably just stepped away for 1 second, but I was going to ask Dr. Henderson too about some of the kind of strategies and systems and support systems that school districts are trying to implement to support teachers. As you mentioned, right, we're creating a new normal, right? Where we may have some teachers are vaccinated, and some teachers are not vaccinated. And so, Dr. Henderson, thank you for coming back. But I had a question for you on a district level. And as you heard Ms. McCoy kind of speak about, that's a new term you use, right? This PTSD from COVID. And you probably don't really realize like it is, teachers were moved to the brinks of a lot of things during this pandemic. And so, as you know, and are anticipating as teachers are coming back to school, and trying to deliver this high quality instruction to students that have probably been in virtually and going through so many things personally themselves, like what systems and supports is the district putting in place to support teachers or to provide resources like a Peak Mind or other organizations in the community that can wrap their arms around these educators?
Sure. Our IPS wellness team has a robust menu of options that are available through our teachers and staff's healthcare plan. And so the wellness team can help them navigate which appropriate choice makes sense. We've also partnered with the Institute for Mind, Body, and Medicine to provide self-care options through this school year. And teachers and principals have the opportunity to participate in the workshops that teach strategies and the science and psychological need for self-care in response to secondary trauma. So it might not be theirs, as Ms. McCoy mentioned, it might be from the students that they're serving.
Yeah. And then Ms. McCoy, I have another question. And we kind of talked about influx of business probably is increasing with teachers and individuals, right? Regular everyday workers are like trying to do a mental health check on themselves. Have you ever served any educators? Like what if you have clients that are educators that are coming to you to render services to them, provide support to them, and if they're coming to you, like what are some of the common trends you're seeing that teachers or educators are dealing with?
Sure. Yeah, we have some, and at a national level, we're talking to some of the different school bodies like WGU Labs. There's major accelerator programs across the U.S. That look at how do we help teachers and students across the U.S. and how do we incubate these new businesses and new ideas. And, I think mental well-being, talking about that is not a new idea, but we know commercially it is. It is something new that people have not purchased like they do health insurance. And so when we're talking to people and our clients that have come on with us, we're seeing that teachers are humans. Teachers are adults. I say that, all industries are at risk for the humanness, right? Unless you've got a fully automated, workplace, every human has the potential to have a life issue that they can't overcome themselves, or that sets them back, or triggers something within them that they either knew could be triggered or didn't. That's just the well-being journey of any adult. And, teachers, like was just said, they deal with what the students bring in. And we know that we've heard enough statistics about what the students have dealt with, that were at home and their family life might not have been the best situation over the last couple, year and a half. And so that is going to come back in, new learned behaviors are coming back with the children into the workplace. And so even if a teacher is, a seasoned teacher, there may be new conditions, new triggers, new behaviors that they're going to start to realize. And I think we have to really see over the next coming weeks, collectively continue to do a pulse check on how are people feeling. What new traumas are they seeing within children? Educate our, educators on what traumas to look for and what red flags. And a lot of school districts do that well. But I just think we're coming into new territory, and we know a lot of the symptoms that we may already know we're going to expect to see. But I think there's going to be some new ones.
Yeah, and I was going to. And I was going to go ahead, and Dr. Henderson, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. We've talked about that as an IPS leadership team, and we offer social, emotional, and trauma-informed care already in all of our schools. And we, in partnership with IU Health Business Solutions, because we don't know what to anticipate or how our students may present, we're going to be using 3 models to support that healthcare this school year. So school-based health centers, which will provide a nurse practitioner, a traditional IPS school nurse, and then a new partnership with that IU Health Business Solutions to offer RN and LPN supports, because as Ms. McQuay said, new symptoms may present, right? And so we just want to make sure that we can be prepared as much as possible for what our students and our staff members may face when our students start walking in the door next week.
And yeah, I'm going to ask you about that a little bit more, Dr. Henderson. Like, so is IPS, and I know we're just talking about IPS, right? But just any district out there is probably doing some great stuff. But since we have in car, we're going to respect IPS. Does IPS have anything that's doing like check-ins for educators, like throughout the weeks or throughout the months? It's like, hey, let's do a process check to see a temperature check to see how our educators are doing this first 2 weeks back. Do you have some implementation strategies for that, or
it varies school to school. So during the spring, when we first went into kind of digital virtual learning back in the spring of 2020, lots of our schools, on the fly came up with ways to encourage community to be able to let people voice what they were seeing and experiencing. A lot of those practices carried over into last school year and are still happening now. Team meetings, professional learning meetings that are starting off with check-ins. I know my team recently, we started with meditation. Before a 5-minute happiness meditation before we kicked off to our business. And so those things are widespread. I know one of our high schools has, I think it's Wednesday afternoon, where they have an hour where all the staff get on Teams, which is our LMS platform, and they're able to connect. And so even across Twitter, I've seen today different, positive affirmations. And one school has like a little board where you can like indicate where you're feeling that day. And so the leadership team, when they walk in the office, they have an idea. Like, wow, we have a lot of kind of sad people today. Everybody's really excited. So those types of practices that people learned initially when the COVID first hit, they've just kept using or even gotten better ones. And then we have a very robust student support services team that can provide additional training or strategies for our kids and our adults.
Yeah. And I think we just had we got one of our first comments. So it says fear is increasing after I'm assuming the news today in both students, parents, and teachers, right? And so, and that brings me to another point too, and this probably back to both of you ladies, right? Mental health days are important. Oftentimes we can pull students out. If they're having a bad day, we can always pull students out and say like, hey, let's recalibrate, let's get you back together, and I can put you back in class, right? We don't never kind of probably see that on the teacher side, because if you step outside the classroom, you left probably 25 to 30 young people unattended by yourself. So again, Dr. Henderson, I know I'm just putting you on the hot seat right now by all these questions. But it does IPS in your wellness plan, all the supports you guys are having. Let's say a teacher is just like having a rough day because of the PTSD of the pandemic, right? And they're like, hey, I need to have a moment to myself. Is IPS putting some safety precautions in place, like, hey, maybe a teacher may need to have a health day by themselves, a mental health day, or is innovation is brewing around like maybe this teacher can do a virtual class today, and we can have someone sitting in the class, kind of making sure students are on their laptop. So I don't know. So I'm just throwing some ideas and questions out there, but this actually is a little bit staying in line with our question that I do want to ask. Sure. Mental health days are important, as we know, but teachers don't have the opportunity to like turn it off at all, right? And I used to coach high school baseball, so quick little story. I used to coach high school baseball at Warren on the far east side. And pro baseball, you have 162 games out of the season, right? And the coach's job is to make sure his players are ready to go every single day for 162 games, the longest sports season out of all professional sports. I equate that to teachers, right? Every day, a teacher has to be in that classroom for 182 days out of the school year, traditionally, right? You do have some fall breaks, you do have some spring breaks, you do have some Christmas breaks, but we have to be on, the educators, you have to be on every single day to make sure you get the best out of your students. You're the parent, the counselor, the therapist, you are the social worker at times, right? Pour into these students. And so some days you're not allowed that grace and mercy to have those off days or those times like, hey, I just need to recalibrate mentally because I'm not there. And if I'm not there, I can't be there for my students. And so that sharing that story to go back to that question, like, is this IPS kind of is like, we're putting some things in place because we know that teachers may need some additional support and may need those days that they can just break off for a second. And we want to bring people on like IU Health to come in and provide these services. We're doing these check-ins for our teachers as well. So.
Well, I mean, our plan is always to remain nimble and responsive. And so for our school leaders a teacher, that would be their first point of contact, right? To be able to share that, like I need to utilize one of my provided leave days, whether that's personal, sick or what have you. And so we do have some parameters in which teachers can utilize the days they're entitled to, right? To be off of work for whatever reason. We also, if you think about an elementary school where, teachers sometimes need even restroom breaks, right? And so there are processes in schools where teachers know how to be able to get, a quick break to take care of some business. So those are pretty much left to the individual school level. But again, within our IPS provided healthcare and our wellness team, there are telephone numbers that you can call, to be matched to someone. Again, we do have policies in place where if people need to take extended leave, there's process for that and to complete it. And so there are mechanisms by which teachers can take a really short one if need be, but also if they need to take an extended leave.
Awesome. Making sure I'm looking at some more questions. So George Washington is adding social and emotional into their advisory board. And so actually you just see it on the screen right here. So that is awesome.
Lots of schools are doing that. Yeah. Shout out to the Continentals.
Awesome, man. Ms. McCoy, I'm gonna bring you back to the hot seat now. Cause I know you've sat on the sideline for a little bit. I'm just rapid firing Dr. Henderson. So I know about you had a little brief introduction about Peak Mind and the services you can provide, right? That you do provide. Can you go a little bit deeper on like how can schools really take advantage of your services that you provide to make sure that it is, a district-wide, township-wide, charter network-wide that's implemented in the building to support these teachers?
Sure. Well, everything that Dr. Henderson said about what they are doing, I want to say kudos, because out of other customers, that list that she said they're doing is, as top of my list from what I hear in businesses. I don't think it's to anybody's surprise to hear that some businesses do nothing, and so when somebody taps out of their PTO days, they're done. So we're facing an uphill battle. Mental well-being is something we're never not going to be able to talk about again. It may go dormant and quiet for a while, just like any, hot topic. However, it's always going to be there. And so I challenge people to consider technology and how technology is sustainable. A human's energy, we're adults, right? We're only human. We only have so much energy and compassion to give. Even the best of us who, this is our world, our passion, we all need time to step back. And if we're dealing with something in life, or if we get busy with another project, then how does that take the focus off of the well-being initiatives that we put in place? And so technology can sustain that. And that's the beauty of what Peak Mind is doing, is we're doing all of that fantastic stuff, and we're capturing those moments, those teaching moments, the workshops. We can record them with the technology store them into the platform so that in 3 months after a workshop, if somebody forgets what they learned in that moment of reprieve that they had, we bring that back and we use our artificial intelligence. The machine can start to learn patterns of behavior and say, hey, this district is really stressful. You know, it's a stressful time during the holidays due to testing or whatever it is. And those workshop moments, those stored coaching moments can now be resent and redistributed to the population. And it'll start to understand what population is more at risk. And so the technology is sustainable. It's going to remember to say it 7 times, whereas a human, right, a manager, an administrator, if you have to say the same thing 7 times, anybody's going to get a little burnt out on that. It's just human nature. And so that's what we try to capture is, how do we capture the therapeutic moments? How do we capture the mentoring moments? And we use those, and you know, we hit the button once, and it's the machine is doing the rest of the legwork, and it's all positive, social, emotional. And so, you know, we keep things anonymous so that if, you know, somebody does say I'm struggling this week, you know, that doesn't stand with them the next weeks. If they're fine for the next 6, fantastic, right? They've been able to cope and to pivot. But you know, whereas humans, you read that somebody's angry, that may linger with you. Whereas the technology, we can teach it to not be biased in 2 weeks if the person is okay, because that's just the nature of the human emotional journey. And so we really want to use that to support people where they are and in the moments that they need it. We have over 400 resources where, you know, we hear a lot that people through their EAP program, employee assistance program, may have access to one therapist. Well, what we've heard in our user interviews is if they don't like that therapist, they're not going to call them again. And so now what, you know, was a great tool or a potential useful tool is not being utilized because they had a bad experience with that one person, that one coach that they were given. And so we want to look at, how do we go out and find many different therapists? How do we find a lot of different coaches? People, we look for, how do they look different? How do they speak different, right? Different life experiences, because then our users in the platform have an option, a menu list of people that they can choose from, as well as books and products and tools and TED Talks and funny videos, because laughter helps. So those are all the types of resources that we try and go out and find the best of and store those, so that when somebody is struggling, they can open up the platform on their phone or on their desktop and they can find something that's, you know, similar to them. Or better yet, the technology may already be sensing that they're struggling and has already predictively sent them or proactively sent them something to look at.
Awesome. I know we said this word earlier in the conversation, trigger, right? And I know, Ms. McCoy, you said triggers, like, and I don't know if people understand what triggers are. So just for definition terms, can you explain to the audience, like, what are triggers? And then I'm gonna ask another question for that too as well.
Sure. And I am not a mental health provider. I will put that disclaimer out there. But, you know, a trigger is anything that aggravates us. You know, people sometimes don't even realize that, you know, the way that somebody speaks or a word that they use. I will confess, you know, I triggered a word in one of my employees years ago. And, you know, one day she just like yelled at me and she said, if you ever say that word to me again, you know, I'm out of here. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was completely foreign and unknown to me. I had no idea that a word I used in my vocabulary was a trigger to her. And so that was a learning moment for me. And I will, you know, always be conscious of that word moving forward. But those are our, you know, ideas of triggers. You know, somebody sneaking up behind somebody, if, you know, if they have PTSD and somebody comes around a corner too fast and they didn't have time to react, that may trigger a response in them, you know, the fight, flight, or fright type of sensation. And so those are ideas of triggers. Yeah.
And does your platform have trigger assessments?
We don't, but the beauty of technology is, you just said that, you know, and I can overnight, we can, you know, work with somebody, a therapist or a neuroscientist, and now we can implement a technology tomorrow. That's why we created this as a technology and not as a book or not as a coach, because technology can be updated, you know, 24/7 and rolled out to now every one of our users, you know, tomorrow could learn about triggers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know IPS, for the student perspective, they have trigger assessments through some of their teams. And so it helps the teacher understand, like, what are those top 5 triggers of my students, right? Like you said, like being too close to a student, maybe making eye contact with the student, right? The tone of your voice, you know, it's all triggers for sometimes students. And so it kind of brings it to a question, like, how can we help educators identify some of their triggers going into the school year? And again, I haven't sat in the PD session at IPS this, for back to school. So I don't know if IPS, again, your wellness program that you guys are doing with IPS, that you're, doing a little audit on, okay, these are how to be mindful of your triggers going into this school year, right? And we understand what the how difficult it was this last 18, 20 months. And so we're trying to make sure we're prepared, as you come to school day one. So Dr. Henderson, are there any kind of like, proactive strategies that IPS is doing to make sure teachers are aware and can identify their triggers heading to the school year? I think she froze on us.
I will say, the one thing I've learned over the last 7 years while researching this field is a lot of adults have no idea what some of the definitions are in the mental well-being space. And so I would recommend that all companies talk about these words. And, it's great that IPS is doing that for the students, but I would roll that out, same program, to their teachers and start to pose questions. What is a trigger? Define it and give people time to think in their own personal, space. Give them time to think about it because they may not even be aware of it. And, showing examples of what positive coping skills and potential negative coping skills looks like is also good. Role playing. We do it for kids all the time, but we forget that a lot of adults have not been able to learn what some of these schools are doing now, the social emotional. We didn't talk about it as we were growing up. And so it's new concepts for people. Even just saying social emotional learning to some people that are listening in, maybe like, what is that concept? And so defining the basics can be very helpful as we talk about and allow people to think about and to process their own social emotional journey and say, oh, I didn't even know that is a trigger for me. Because once you're aware of it, then you can, once you're educated and you become aware, now you can start the journey of, do I like this feeling in me? Do I like that I do this behavior or do I not? And then you can start the theory, the change theory, pre-contemplation. You contemplate what you're dealing with, and then you have to go into the process of changing the behavior. So it's a process.
Yeah.
It's complicated, which is why we don't have it commonplace in our society today and in our workplaces. But the one good thing that a lot of people tell me that, they feel came out of the pandemic is that we can never not know that how stressed and how, how resilient we are and what potential where our minds might go in our darkest places, because I think we've all been taken through a journey and a roller coaster ride.
Yeah. You just brought another word. I'm probably putting my teacher hat on for our listeners to make sure they know some of this terminology. So you said coping skills. And again, those that's listening, Ms. McCoy already said she is not a professional mental health provider. So, or practice clinical work. So, but I know you probably know coping skills. For our audience and our listeners and our viewers, can you explain to them what coping skills are so they're aware?
Yeah, coping skill is how you cope through, how you get through something. And some people coping looks vastly different, which is why we have 145 action steps that are coping skills in our platform, because meditation and mindfulness and breathing techniques to somebody may be way too foreign. And so as I may applaud the 5-minute mindfulness positive meditation for, the groups that do it, that may not resonate with certain people. And so if people are hesitant in those mindful moments, does that help them cope with their stress? It may not. They may tune out. And so we need to offer other techniques and ways that others that, are different than us. They just think different. They process emotion different. A coping skill can look vastly different. Going on walks can be a coping skill for certain people. Talking to a friend is a good coping skill for certain people. And if, anybody's challenged to know how they can best cope with life stressors and hurdles, that's why therapists are beneficial, or coaches, or, people who are educated in the field of what true coping looks like. And because they can help you to process that and process your own emotions and find and help you come up with a journey plan, an action plan for yourself.
Yeah. So, Dr. Henderson, I see you I know. So I was asking about coping skills and just making sure our audience know about certain terminology. And so going back to Dr. Henderson, this is actually a district question, right? And I know you, and then disclaimer, the answer you give, Dr. Henderson, you're not speaking for every district across the city of Indianapolis, right? But do you think that school districts, so you're seeing other employers in different industries and corporate America are starting to make their staff actually be fully vaccinated, right? Do you feel that, this is personal opinion, what is your outlook right now on mandating fully vaccinated staff to be inside the building? Because as we know, I think right now under 12 years old, students can't be vaccinated. I think they're starting to rolling out a little bit more for our older teens, but at the moment right now, young people cannot be vaccinated. So it's really up to the teachers to make sure they're protecting not only themselves, but also protecting the students as well. So what is your kind of thought about that? Your first reaction to that question?
Yeah, you asked me personally, but I'm going to tell you that our IPS stance is that we strongly encourage all staff to get vaccinated. I mean, we know that it's a personal choice. We will continue to follow the CDC, the IDOH, the NCPHD guidance to ensure we're properly implementing the mitigation strategies to protect, our school community, kids, and adults as well. Especially those who, as you mentioned, can't get the vaccine yet. We also partner with community programs to provide opportunities, for the COVID vaccination for our school staff, students, and families. Members of our leadership team have been very, public and modeled that, they have. Myself, I've taken the vaccine, shared across social media. So we will continue to encourage, our staff to do that. But in terms of requiring it, we are not requiring the vaccine for any staff or students.
Okay, awesome. It brings me to another question. So again, we may have parents watching this, community members, and if they're not in education right now, like maybe it's a parent or a community stakeholder, like what would a typical day look like at the beginning of the school year, right? And what I mean by that, we know teachers are not required to wear masks if they're fully vaccinated. Are students required to wear masks? What is the outlook on that? Are we doing temperature checks as they enter the building? Are we offering vaccinations throughout the week? Like, kind of explain to me like what a typical day may look like as far as safety and social distancing, and then also going into like a week time frame as well.
Sure. So remember, effective August 2nd, all IPS staff and students will be wearing their masks regardless of vaccination status. And when you think about what a typical day may look like, so we returned to in-person learning during the last school year where everyone was masked. So the social distancing, the frequent cleaning, the disposable mask and hand sanitizer being available will also be available when students return next week. We will continue to ask parents and families to do COVID checks for symptoms daily before sending their kiddos to school. All of our high-touch surfaces will continue to be cleaned and sanitized frequently. We will require visitors to wear masks, when that's a parent as a visitor, dropping in and off, coming for a meeting or other type of community partners. We will continue to hold vaccination clinics throughout the school year. We hosted some this past spring. I know Arsenal Tech was a location. There were likely to be another one. And those dates, times, and locations will be provided on our district website as well as sent through district communication to families and staff members. We ask outside of like outdoor for class or PE or athletics, students can take their mask off in those spaces. But again, for most of the students will feel very similar to how it felt when we were returned to school last October, and then also again when we came back in the second semester. The 3 feet social distance and when possible and practical. So we know that our kiddos are excited to be back, and our teachers are excited to have them in person for day one, but we are still continuing to practice those mitigation strategies. Contact tracing will be something that our school-based school administrators did last year. They will continue to do that if and when someone, tests positive. We will quarantine. A 10-day quarantine is required for individuals that have been exposed to someone with COVID-19, and hopefully, we won't get into a situation, but we also, have our processes if we have to pivot, right, to remote learning for a classroom, either because of student or staff positive. And so again, our families may say, oh, this kind of feels the same. Obviously, if you chose a full virtual option last year, which this school year we're all in person, we are partnering with 2 of our innovation partners for families who still want their students to experience learning virtually. And so they won't actually be in our IPS schools. That a family, if they want to be virtual, they would have chosen either Paramount Schools of Excellence or Phelan Leadership Academy for that option. We did take feedback from our parents that we know people wanted that. We also took feedback from our staff, how it was both mentally and physically exhausting to teach kids in person and to, teach our students who are online at the same time. We call that concurrent instruction. And so we want to prioritize in person and make sure that we deliver in the best high quality we can in person. And for families who still want virtual, they also have quality options.
Well, I'm on mute. Sorry. That was me. I've said I'm talking and I'm on mute. So you just heard Dr. Henderson. I kudos to IPS again for having all these systems already in place. As we know, like one thing the pandemic has taught us, like we need to be more proactive than reactive. And it seems like IPS is doing a great job of that. And so again, for our listeners that are watching and tuning in, we definitely had Dr. Henderson, who was a chief school officer. Make sure I got the right name. So chief school officer for IPS and also the CEO and founder of Peak Mind, Alicia McCoy. So Dr. Henderson actually just shared some strategies that IPS is putting in place as we're gearing up for back to school, and kind of talked about how contract tracing will be implemented, how students mask mandates, about the vaccination protocol they're not requiring teachers to be vaccinated. They're definitely highly recommended. And of course, we talked about the proof of vaccination for teachers to upload or educators to upload that proof of vaccination inside of an HR portal that IPS has. But we talked about social distancing inside the building, outside the building, when it's possible, definitely inside the building. So you have a big classroom. Hopefully you can still try to do social distance as much as possible. But it's a really great thing. And also we talked about, you guys did have in the summertime the opportunities for people to get vaccinations at Arsenal Tech. And so definitely if you want to look at those dates again, it will be on their district website for new vaccination dates. We talked about temperature checks. Parents have to wear masks entering and while they're in the building as well. And so kudos to you guys for sure for making sure priority is our students, making sure they're safe, and also priority is our teachers as well. And so to go back to their family safe and sound. I'll make sure I check the chat, make sure we got all my questions, all my statements. Perfect. We already talked about that. We talked about triggers. Another question. So this is unfamiliar territory, right? And I know we're not CDC officials on this call, but the Delta variant is real, right? We understand there's new data coming about the Delta variant. Everything's researched, and I know Dr. Henderson, you may have this answer better than I know it, and so I want to make sure our audience can probably hear this answer. And so there's been assumptions that if you've been fully vaccinated, you can still not saying catch COVID-19 because you have immunity to it. You can still carry the virus and pass it to someone else that has not been vaccinated. From your perspective and guidance that you're receiving, information you're receiving from the CDC. So for those teachers that have been vaccinated, right, fully vaccinated, and they are non-masked inside the school building, what has the CDC, have you been hearing from the CDC in regards to that, about carrying the virus since they have immunity, not really being sick, but also passing that virus over to students that are not vaccinated?
I don't know if I'm quite following the question. So when our students and our teachers start on Monday for our first day of school, they will all be vaccinated. This past week for teacher professional development, in our earlier guidance, they did, if they chose and wanted it to be unmasked, could have uploaded, proof of vaccination. We still strongly recommend, that's in all of our language. We still recommend, we know, I think that this recent CDC guidance would also say that vaccinated individuals should still, remain masked. They could also catch it. It just may not be as serious or could, result in a life-ending situation. And so we just try to follow that. That when we were allowing staff to be unmasked who were vaccinated and who could provide that proof moving forward until, if it changes again, we will all be masked regardless of that vaccination status, because even if you are, it doesn't mean that you can't catch it. It just might mean that you may have a less severe case and then you could definitely still pass it on to somebody else, vaccinated or unvaccinated.
Got you. And so, Ms. McCoy, this is kind of goes back to you. So is, as Ms. Henderson talked about, like we may have some teachers that are doing virtual instruction, right? And they don't have maybe the wellness program inside their school and can have that resource teacher or someone trained professional that can provide some mental health services to them. So do you know any resources right now that's out there for teachers that are probably doing remote instruction that kind of need some that community or need some support, understand their triggers? Because I understand too, even though you're behind a computer screen, there's still some things that's probably going on around you that is still adding some drain, some overwhelmness to your life. So do you have any resource that you would like to share and inform our audience about?
Well, 211 is, an initiative that came out, and I'm trying to think of the website that Indiana put out but I know findhelp.org is a national help organization that you can go in and put it in your zip code and find a ton of local resources around you, everything from therapy to mental health to food, supplies, if you're struggling with supplies, to diapers, if you know somebody that's struggling. And, that catch-all of help, I think, is super important to remember, because we don't know what people are struggling with. Sometimes we carry others' struggles, our family members' struggles. And so you may have a teacher that seemingly appears to have, things going right in their life, but they may have a sibling or a child, an adult child, or somebody that's struggling with something else, or a spouse that may be struggling. And so even though you're the administrator and you see virtually the person seems to be fine, even that word fine and okay, right? We know that there's a lot of people that we use that word because it's just common language that we use as Americans, but we may not be fine. And so I do challenge all workplaces to move beyond the simple conversations and go into the curious conversations when you do have FaceTime with somebody, especially if it's virtual, because you can't pick up on as much of the shoulder shrug, and those body, cues that you can usually see if somebody's really carrying a heavy weight of anxiety or stress on them. And so being more curious with conversations, and, instead of asking, how was your weekend? I like to ask, if I know people who have kids, I say things like, hey, did your kids give you a chance this weekend to take a nap? Right? Even those basic questions that is such a random question, people who really need to vent will say, no, they didn't. They just love it. And they go into a 10-minute rant and vent about what their kids put them through. So those curious conversations, changing the way that we ask simple questions so that we don't just get the fine and okay. And always, reminding people about the resources, even if it seems like everyone's okay and you've done the survey that week and the sentiment analysis says that people are fine, send the resources out. And because the more that we can learn coping skills and how to overcome hurdles when we're okay, then we'll be able to carry those learned behaviors and those resources when we're not okay. And so our brains learn better when we're in a calmer environment. So teach while it is, okay, so that then they can go into a stressful moment having those resources already programmed in.
Awesome. And I think our great producers behind the scenes just dropped that link right there on the screen. So, man, this is awesome. I know we can talk all day and all night about this stuff. And as an educator, former educator, it's phenomenal to see the systems. Again, Dr. Henderson, what IPS is doing to make sure teachers, students, staff, administrators are safe during the academic school year is phenomenal. And then also Ms. McCoy, to see what you guys are creating over there at Peak Mind is truly awesome. I wanted to make sure that we can bless our audience with any final tips, final words of encouragement, advice, information that you think our community needs to know about back to school. Definitely hope we got a lot of educators hopefully tuning in to make sure, they're being informed about what's back to school will look like. And so just want to make sure I open the floor up to those final remarks that Dr. Henderson or Ms. McCoy would like to leave our audience with.
Well, since I'm still up, I'll say, I challenge people to communicate more. Just like I said, administrators and managers communicate the resources that you have and you're providing. Same for if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, communicate what you need as well. Be your own advocate. I call them well-being champions. Be your own champion and your own advocate. If you're struggling with something, speak up. The more that we can normalize the conversation around, hey, I'm not okay, or I am struggling with this, the more that we can normalize it, the faster we'll get to the place where it's okay to talk about these things, and more people will be able to come out and talk about it. So, and if you see somebody else struggling, be their champion. You don't have to call people out by name, but you can say, hey, I want to raise my hand, raise the flag for others. So just be a champion and continue to communicate, because it's going to be a while. They're predicting that it's going to be a while before, some people call it the new normal, or before we normalize, before we get to a place where it's not a pandemic again. It's going to be a while for the mental health pandemic to calm down. So just be resilient and continue to communicate.
Awesome.
And I would say for parents, students, educators, be nimble and responsive. I mean, I'm also going to say, make sure that you're checking for COVID symptoms daily. And if you have any of them, stay at home. Consult your medical professional. That's how we keep everyone safe, right? By making sure that we ourselves are healthy. And just think about when I said the responsiveness and the nimbleness, as Ms. McQuay said, we are not in the clear. And so what is in place today and for next week, we could get news guidance, we could, have to pivot. And while we hope to prioritize in-person learning for both our students and our staff, and we know our families, that's all where we want to be, we have to be nimble and be following what the medical professionals and health professionals are telling us. And so I think for those who are planners and they like to, they have their whole year mapped out, just again, be nimble and to the fact that could shift, right? For no fault of your own, for no fault of your school, your superintendent, your school board, anybody like that. And so I think that it was something I would just share with families. Like, most places are starting school in person. We know that that's what families wanted to do. That's what educators wanted to do, but we're not out of the pandemic. And so just having, in contingency, thinking about, if I had to pivot, what might this look like, right? If my student was doing remote learning, or I had to go back and teach through remote learning. And I think just having that awareness can go a long ways in helping with some of the mental exhaustion and the emotion and the physicality, because you've anticipated it.
Yeah. I don't know how I can close after that, but I definitely I want to make sure I give a shout out to Inner Power Indy, the Indianapolis Recorder, and the Educate Me Foundation for definitely hosting these town hall series. And we have another one coming up in a few weeks, so we're super excited to continue this conversation from a different lens here shortly. But I want to thank Dr. Henderson and Ms. McCoy for joining us this evening, because you could be anywhere else, but you decided to catch up with us today. And I think the last thing I want to make sure everybody knows, like, the biggest thing, it takes all of us, right? It takes us all to make sure that we can come together to make sure we're doing the proper things for social distancing. Like I said, the vaccination is a choice. Do what's best for you and your family. And like, Dr. Henderson said, like, as parents, you're sending your kids to school, doing your part, right? Making sure you're checking temperatures and all those things too as well. Checking with your medical service provider. And so it takes all of us, educators, school leaders, school districts, service providers, the community, parents. It takes us all to really come together to fight this thing. Because like you said, Dr. Henderson, we're not at the pandemic. We're still in it. And so, again, I want to thank everybody. Thank the people behind the scenes making this thing look all pretty and for our audience. And hopefully we'll see you guys here shortly for another Educators of the Trauma of COVID-19 Town Hall presented by the Indianapolis Recorder, the Educate Me Foundation, and Inner Power LLC.